I've traveled every road in Pennsylvania.
Welcome to Barnstorming PA.
Welcome to Barnstorming PA.
The show is about to start. We just have a couple of quick things to say before
Housekeeping.
Little housekeeping, exactly.
Housekeeping detail.
New season 4.
It's
here. You're in it.
You're in it.
Yeah, you're in it. Yeah.
It started.
Season 4. It started. You're listening to it. You're a part of it now. Season 4.
If they're watching this later, they're actually time traveling back to now, to the beginning of season 4.
Yes,
That's cool.
they are now joining us on this lovely Wednesday morning.
Now we can add sci-fi to our genres.
Yes, absolutely. We're getting a little off the rails here, though.
I think that's on brand.
That's on brand. Season 4, we're doing the 2021 elections. Very exciting opportunity year. And then we're going to shift into the 2022 cycle.
Yep.
God willing.
Yep. God willing. And, there's still, if you've never heard us before, there's our typical, we like to call it artisanal podcasting, or sometimes, brain to ear, just like,
Yes.
farm to fork. So we're all about fostering great conversations with each other and with guests. Sometimes people who are coming out for the first time, sometimes people who do lots of great work all over Pennsylvania around progressive politics and social change. And, this started 4 years ago in this very house, in another room, I think.
No, actually, our first podcast was at Ironfront co-working space.
Oh, right. We better cut this.
Which is they don't do co-working anymore, but a fabulous event space in downtown Lewisburg. Check it out.
Maybe they'll sponsor us.
Maybe they'll sponsor us. Yeah. So we're excited for these new programs. You can support us by joining us on Patreon, and for as little as $2 a month, you can access our whole back catalog. We'll thank you on every episode.
Every episode until we get enough people supporting us.
Yeah.
It'll be like one of those auditory brick walks where people's names are.
Yeah, and then we also will have a shindig every year, and you will get an invite. So support us on Patreon, or you could just donate on PayPal if you wanted to do a lump sum and not a recurring donation.
You can find those links on our website, which is barnstormingpa.org. It's always barnstormingpa. And also in the show notes, if you're listening to this on any of the fine podcasting platforms. There's other levels of support on Patreon, and we've got some great merch and swag that are coming, some stickers, t-shirts. At the highest level is some, special local cuisine, at the highest level of giving. Well, that sounded weird if you're going to get some scrapple. I'll make you a pie.
Yeah, a PA.
A PA pie.
Did you get that wallpaper made for your home office?
No, that's a virtual screen.
But what you have mastered that I haven't, which is embarrassing because in theory I'm a professional at this, is there's no, usually you can tell a virtual one because there's like a little bit of a gap around the head. Like you've got the lighting.
Your Zoom is on point.
The best thing an 18-year-old ever did for me.
Oh my gosh.
Is this your own 18-year-old or one you borrowed?
No, it's a borrowed one. That likes this type of stuff. So
cool, great. Well, welcome to Barnstorming here. This is a podcast about politics and culture in Pennsylvania. Specifically, Jordy and I live in central Pennsylvania, Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, and Union County, and so that tends to be sort of the focus of our. I wouldn't necessarily call this news as much as commentary and analysis. But yeah, welcome to Barnstorming PA. My name is Taylor Leibman. I used to be in politics professionally, but now I've made the turn into sort of civil society nonprofit stuff, and so I work in neighborhood revitalization. And as always, I'm happy to be joined here by my co-producer, my co-host, my good friend Jordy Comas here.
Thank you very much, Taylor. We're thrilled to be in that time of the year. We call it opportunity years when there's municipal and judicial elections. It's really kind of the lowest level of governance and the highest. I'll be wearing among the many hats.
The highest level of opportunity to change lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
To make a difference.
Absolutely. And among other things, I am the. It sounds very important. I am the vice president of the Borough Council of Lewisburg. So we have with us Judge David Spurgeon, who is a candidate for Commonwealth Court. And this will become relevant later, because even for me in local governance, I know that Commonwealth Court is the court of, I may not use the right terminology, but it's the court where cases that are about people who are bringing suit against a government entity, or I suppose government entity to government entity as well. Correct? So has
So this is a
huge impact on our lives.
This is a very important election,
Very
and
important.
so welcome, Judge.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Excited.
Yeah. We have a couple of questions here. Sort of the outline of this is we're going to do some, ask you some questions about your background, where you're from, what made you pursue make a career in law, and how your background affects your judicial philosophy and all of this stuff. And then we're going to get into some more questions about your judicial philosophy. And we're going to end on a game called Judge This. So I guess without further ado, oh yeah, and we have to say a little bit about the race. Thank you, Jordy. 4 candidates, 2 will be selected. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's yourself, Judge Lori Dumas, Judge Compton, and Wallace. I'm blanking on her first name. Is Compton running, or Crompton? I'm sorry. Is he running as an incumbent?
No. So he was appointed. So you have to run for the seat. You're just filling a vacancy until the next election.
So for the average voter, sorry, just real quick. So if I remember correctly, when it's an incumbent, it marks that on the ballot, right? So when people are...
Yeah. So if you're a judge, you actually only ever run one time for that seat that you're sitting in. Then after that, you seek a retention vote, which is different than an election. So
these are 2 open seats.
2 open seats.
Exactly.
And I know that just stating at the outset here, running for judge is kind of a bizarre thing. A lot of states don't even have this, but there are limitations as to what you're able to campaign with. And for the listener here, I'm sure that the judge is well aware of these limitations. We're not allowed to ask you your position on any specific issues, specific court cases, and you're not allowed to make any sort of promises. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, so you're bound by the judicial canon. So when you're running for judge, even if you're a lawyer running for a judge, you're bound to not give positions because a case may come in front of you that you would be presiding over, and then you'd have to recuse yourself. So you're not allowed to give positions. There's lots of rules for judges. We're not allowed to ask for money. We're not allowed to accept money. Most candidates you see putting up these Facebook or on social media, these requests, donate now, give me money, or making a speech, give me money. We are actually prohibited from doing that.
However, we can ask people to give money to you. So if you Google Judge David Spurgeon, you can see that there is a place there that you can give money. And it takes money to run. You have to buy ads, you have to buy literature. You're running a campaign with, one hand tied behind your back, the one that would ask for money. So please give.
Yeah, and do your homework, and it's a great website. So check that out. So I think we've covered the race, more or less, the sort of the mechanics of it. Did
we get that right? Is there anything else kind of setting? Sorry, David.
No, I think people are sometimes confused about how the court system works in Pennsylvania. And so, if you want me to talk a little bit about that, I'd be happy to talk a little bit about that, or save it for later.
We're going to get to it.
Okay.
I want to start out with your background, and you're from Pittsburgh or McKeesport, isn't that right?
Yeah.
Pittsburgh area, and I want to, I want you to just talk a little bit about your background and how that informs your judicial philosophy. I know that's kind of a vague question, but where are you from?
Yeah, so no, I'd be happy to. So I am, I'm a first generation college graduate and first generation law school graduate. So I grew up in the steel towns outside of Pittsburgh, which is about 10 miles outside of Pittsburgh, a city called McKeesport, which was once one of the largest steel producers in the world. And when I was probably at the end of elementary school and the beginning of middle school, that's when the steel industry collapsed in McKeesport. And that's when, the city at one time had a population of 60,000 people just within a 2-mile radius. And now it has 19,000 people. And I went from, my sister is 13 years older than me. She graduated 13 years ahead of me. And she had over 800 people in her high school graduating class. And I had barely 400. So literally, everyone moved away because if you didn't work in the steel industry, you worked because of the steel industry. everyone ended up moving away, and it was a very depressed time. I was fortunate because my dad worked on the railroad, and the railroad still moved, obviously, but one of his primary jobs was dealing with trains and steel and things like that. So that meant that things had to change for him too. So he ended up having to do traveling and ended up being laid off a bunch of times and things like that. Basically having to get retrained to have a different job on the railroad, which luckily he had a union that was able to fight for him to do that. But it meant that he had to start over again, basically in the seniority level for the position that he had. And so my dad pretty much retired, still working shift work after 42 years on the railroad because of the way things changed. But that really shaped me, because I saw people who were very, very in a good place. There were good union jobs in that town, and people were doing well, and they're able to send their kids to school and buy a camp somewhere in the woods to run away on the weekends and enjoy themselves, to a position where those same people were probably standing in food lines because they no longer had a job. So I think that really did shape me. So that's where I came from, the city of McKeesport. And I graduated from McKeesport High School. I'm proud to say I'm a graduate of public school. And I'm proud to tell you that because I'm the only high-rated candidate in this race for Commonwealth Court. Of the 4 candidates, and more in the primary, I was the only person that received the top designation by the Pennsylvania Bar Association as highly recommended by the Pennsylvania Bar Association. I say that every time because I'm really excited because I am a graduate of a public school that actually is, gets a pretty bad rap sometimes and has some difficulties and struggles with finances and things like that. Spent my life there in McKeesport, moved a whole 2 miles away. So I didn't go very, very far. So it's called the Monongahela Valley. We call it the Mon Valley. And that's the old river steel towns. Worked as soon as I was able to. I needed to get a part-time job, when I was still in high school. So I worked to do that. Then I went to Duquesne Law School or Duquesne University for undergrad. I spent my summers working in an amusement park called Kennywood Park. I spent 4 long, hot summers there. And most people in my area, if you were going to go to school, that's where you worked, because you worked about 65 hours a week. And it was the best paying job you could get because of the number of hours that you worked. So I worked there to pay for books and whatever else I could, do at Duquesne. But I was fortunate that my parents, did everything that they needed to do to help me get through school. And, I had to work my way through school as well, but did everything. So I graduated with a political science degree and a German degree, and then went to law school at Duquesne. And I knew right then and there that I loved the courtroom, fell in love with the courtroom, and it became one of their national trial moot court participants, meaning I traveled around the country and competed with other schools in the courtroom. So I knew at that point that I was destined to be a trial lawyer because I loved it so much. But I can't really tell you why I went to law school. I really have no aspect where I said, oh, this is what I want to do, or I'm not from a family of lawyers. I didn't have a background where I had friends that were lawyers or their parents were lawyers. And, that really, really resonated with me because I didn't know how things worked in law school. So your first year, basically in January, you start looking for a job for the next summer. So you spend a couple months looking for a job. I didn't know that. No one ever told me that. So
I want to pause there for a second because I actually think I wanted to pull something out from what you said. I don't want to read too much into your background, but often I was in higher education myself for a long time as an educator. Like coming from the kind of background you described, you didn't necessarily come with, what we call the cultural capital or like the sort of special rule book about that, right? Like you didn't have friends or your parents' friends who knew like you get an internship and all of that. Like, does that resonate with your story?
Yeah. And that's what I was getting into, because my first summer after law school, I was a bartender because I didn't know that I was supposed to be looking for this job so early. And so they were all filled. The internships were pretty much all filled. I ended up doing an internship for credit and no money. But as I was talking to people as a first year law student, and I was the only person from my law school class from my region as well, but from the more fluent communities surrounding the Pittsburgh area, people that stayed close to home like I did, there were, one of our more affluent communities, there were 10 kids from my class, I say kids, but adults in my law school class that all went to the same high school, so they had that connection. So when I would say things to people like, oh, well, what are you doing this summer? I'm really struggling. And they'd say, oh, well, my mom called her sorority sister and she's a federal judge. So she is, I'm going to be spending time with her. Or, my dad's a lawyer, so I'm going to clerk in his best friend's firm, or, whatever that was. And that was absolutely an obstacle. It was something that I didn't share. And, it's things as basic as golf. No one taught me how to golf. I still don't know how to golf very well. But don't realize that obstacle that's placed in front of you in terms of networking and things like that, just because, McKeesport didn't have a golf team. So there was none of that aspect. And my dad didn't golf because he worked shifts. He wasn't a golfer. And that was something that was really difficult to understand. So I think that's helped shape me throughout the process, throughout my life. I'm always very fortunate. I tell people that I advanced very quickly in my career because I went to McKeesport High School, where you had such a diverse group of people. You had people who, had affluent parents because of the school district is made up of multiple different communities. And then tell people, in front of me, I had a guy whose, dad was the turnpike commissioner. And on the other side of me, I had a guy whose dad was a plumber. And then behind me, I might have had a guy whose dad was in jail. And then on the other side of me, I had a guy who didn't know whose dad was. So it really, really shaped me. And I think it helped me deal with the people that I was going to deal with as a public servant for the last 25, 30 years.
Just to be clear, the turnpike commissioner and the jail were not the same.
Not at the moment.
Not at the moment. I'm just,
You never know with Pennsylvania.
Public corruption could come up on your docket, I would think.
Absolutely.
And I'm sort of joking, but only because it's a reality and a truth that's out there. I mean, I just want to say real quick, I lived in Bethlehem. I'm from Tennessee originally, and so my accent might come out, but I lived in Bethlehem for 4 years right after college. And I was there when the last blast furnace shut down. Yeah. From 60,000 to 13,000 is an incredible, that's a population implosion of on a Richter scale, it's like a 12.
Yeah, totally.
Never recovered.
Yeah. So I'm kind of curious, why did you choose to run for Commonwealth Court in particular, as opposed to the other things that?
So my background, so after I went to law school and did everything I was doing in law school, I knew that I wanted to be in the courtroom. So I ultimately went to a firm right after law school and was not pleased at all. It just was not something I wanted to be in court. So I started doing pro bono stuff as much as they would let me. So I started doing pro bono PFAs, protection for abuse orders for victims of domestic violence. So that was something that I knew I could actually get into court besides helping people. But as soon as an opening in the district attorney's office happened, they didn't happen very much in our county. Although there's 112 attorneys in that office, it didn't happen very much. I ended up going to that office because I knew that was a job where you were in court every single day. And I think that's partly, was one of the aspects of Commonwealth Court that interested me. So I was in the DA's office for almost 19 years. So I didn't plan on staying that long, but I went for almost 19 years because, as I mentioned, I advanced very quickly because I was very good at interacting with people from all backgrounds. And I became the youngest deputy district attorney in Allegheny County history. So I was very young at that point when I became deputy district attorney. And I've supervised in a lot of different areas. But part of being a prosecutor is holding people accountable. Some people need a break. Some people need to be held accountable. We're always going to need prosecutors in our lives, good ones, hopefully. And the Commonwealth Court's very similar to that. The Commonwealth Court's job is to hold the government accountable, to make sure that the people's voices aren't silenced, that the government is not overrunning people. And I think that I have the unique position, having been the only prosecutor running for this job, to make sure that people are held accountable the right way, to make sure that people are held accountable in a way that makes it better for everyone involved. So I think that's the other aspect of it is, the Commonwealth Court's the only court like it in the nation. And because of that, you serve as an appellate judge, but there are some cases where you have original jurisdiction where you actually sit as a trial judge. So it's truly, for me, the best of both worlds because I love being a trial judge, but I also am very interested in the appellate aspect of it as I've progressed in my career. So for me, it was the best of both worlds.
So for like a layperson, the appellate side, is this accurate? It's like not just the facts of the case, but then it's digging into the bigger picture in terms of was this law correctly applied? Are there questions about what the law means that need to be resolved?
Absolutely. So, in Pennsylvania, we have our court system is a triangle. So where I am now is a court of common pleas, which is the trial level. Then the very top, we have the Supreme Court. And then in the middle, we have the two intermediate appellate courts that actually do the bulk of the work for our appellate system. And for example, in Commonwealth Court, 96% of those cases actually stay there. They don't go to the Supreme Court because the Superior Court and the Commonwealth Court, you have the ability to appeal. For the Supreme Court, they have to decide whether or not they accept your case.
Can you give me an example of what kinds of cases you might see, like a case study?
Sure. So Commonwealth Court, as I said, Commonwealth and Superior Court, they call them sister courts because they are both of equal jurisdiction in terms of power, but they hear different types of cases. The Commonwealth Court hears cases involving the government. So anything that our government is touching. So if the government sets up a regulation with one of its departments or agencies, and you want to appeal one of those regulations, it would go to the court. If you want to appeal the way your tax dollars are being used, then it would go to that court. If you're dealing with any sort of labor issues, so any union issues, collective bargaining, all of those things go to the court, as well as workers' compensation, unemployment compensation, appeals of any licensure issues, as well as all election law. So all election law goes straight to that court. That actually sit as a trial judge for election law cases for most aspects. So it's very, very important that the government's doing what it needs to do. It's truly the last check and balance on our government. And there's only 9 judges on that court. So the impact that you're making decisions for people that are not a party to you. That was another thing that interested me. In Superior Court, it's X versus Y. So whether it be the government, whether or not it be Commonwealth of Pennsylvania or a particular person, a breach of contract or divorce, any of those type of things. In Commonwealth Court, you're making very, very, very impactful decisions because you're dealing with something that may affect everyone in Pennsylvania's air or everyone's tax dollars. So you have a lot of decisions made for you in that court where you're actually not a named party.
So something you said that I've probably been told this, but I want to go back. Original jurisdiction means you said we're unique. So are we the only state where we have an appellate level court? Basically, would say we think there's a problem. We're going to start a case. So
the Commonwealth Court is the only court like it in the nation, and it literally is a court for the government. For issues with the government. And it's a little over 50 years old. It's not an old court. Our Supreme Court's the oldest court in the nation. So this court was created, and I think in 1968, and I think it actually came into fruition in around 1970. So it is not an old court by any means, but there was such a number of cases that needed to be heard that they decided to create the specialized court in Pennsylvania.
Okay. And I mean, another set of cases real quick, because I think it's on people's minds. I know it's on my mind. I believe that the Commonwealth Court played and you mentioned this about elections, but in 2020, we just saw an unprecedented number of judicial challenges to election process, procedure. Of course, there was a lot that with the pandemic that put election officials and Department of State officials. But am I right? Like the Commonwealth Court, I mean, I know that the federal courts in Philadelphia ruled on something in Pennsylvania, but didn't the Commonwealth Court also?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are, in the last election, the past president filed a number of lawsuits across the entire nation regarding as to whether or not the election was legitimate or not legitimate. And Commonwealth Court is actually the only place in the entire nation where the president won cases. He actually won 2 of them there. But my own, and it impacted me, not because of the presidential election, but my own state senator. There was a lawsuit filed for my state senator, Senator Jim Brewster, and the Commonwealth Court chose not to count his votes. And the Supreme Court overruled the Commonwealth Court on that. But this Commonwealth Court did not want to count votes, about 2,700 of them, that would have changed that election for that Senate seat. So that's what I mean.
Yes, and just to be clear, those were legitimate votes that came in after the election or something.
So I think if I recall correctly, the issue was whether or not in Allegheny County, which is where a majority of them were, there were questions as to the date that they actually came in. Allegheny County has a timestamp, but the actual person that voted didn't write the time or date on it, but it was timestamped the date it was received.
And also, I because this sadly is a kind of we're like the immune system for disinformation in our society. I have some background in election and voter protection things. I was actually one of the petitioners in League of Women Voters, which is the Commonwealth in 2018. But like so often, right, just the fact that the ballots came in, people who want to question the election system will be like, oh, well, that was a problem. And I always say, like, voting should be as easy as possible, right? And you should always, and I think the courts did this generally in 2020, they should err on the side of protecting the vote, right? And so people get very like, oh, well, you were late. Like you're a high school teacher. You turned in your paper late, so you get a penalty. And I'm like, that's immaterial, right? Like that decision to, for example, to have not counted that votes strips the votes of people for a very silly reason. And there is literally almost no voter fraud in the sense of people trying to vote twice or vote the wrong way. And even the little bit of voter election fraud is one of my favorite things to do. The Heritage Organization, a renowned right-wing organization, keeps a database of all voter and election fraud. And it's actually, ammunition for supporting elections. I think they have it there to try and stir up that there's a problem, but there's so few problems. So anyway, I'm sorry to be on my soapbox, but I think it's really important. And I know you can't be on a soapbox about it.
Right. I mean, I can't answer. I can tell you what the Supreme Court said, and it said that we should be trying to count as many votes as we can. And Supreme Court said that, so I can say that. And I think it's important that we realize, though, I mean, there's actual cases pending now in the Commonwealth Court. There was just a lawsuit filed as to whether or not personal information could be given to a third party, as to trying to say that the election in 2020 was or wasn't valid. That being disclosed. There's a pending case now whether or not the Department of Health for Pennsylvania has the ability to require masks for students going to school. I mean, when I say that this court impacts Pennsylvanians, it truly impacts Pennsylvanians, and it's probably the least known court amongst them all.
Yeah. Jordy, would you like to move on? Should we move on to the opponents?
Yeah. Well, actually, maybe it makes more sense. Let's do the other one first. Just because it's more kind of substantive. So I want to talk a little bit, and I know that you highlighted this on your website, the whole issue of violence. I'm calling it violence against women. This was particularly in my mind. I mean, I have a daughter who's almost 18, and she works as a server at a restaurant. And I realized recently that, I feel a bit sort of naive saying this, but especially as a server, she's probably going to be sexually harassed in her place of employment. Like, that's just a reality. And then more generally, this Gabriella Petito, the young woman who disappeared, came up, and that's been in the news. But one thing I've seen, which I think is important, is a lot of media criticism saying, why is it that we lift up these cases of young, white, air quotes, pretty women who disappear, and there are all of these others? And it led me down a path. I was reading a kind of an op-ed in the Guardian, the British newspaper, but they're talking about how in Europe, I think in France, they are actually leaning into the term femicide, right? To really put weight behind the fact that this is not just a lot of bad apples, to use that metaphor, but the orchard has got some real rot in it. And, the statistics are terrible. I think it's like of crimes, the FBI knows of the crimes where we know the murderer for women, 98% of the time when they know who the perpetrator, when they know who did the crime, 90% of the time women know who it was. And of that 98, almost 70%, it's someone close to them, boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, husband. So you've done a lot on this. Do you want to talk about the issue? And then also, do you think there's something to be gained for as a society for saying, we need to lift this up and talk about it? I don't care about the term, but we need to talk about this as an epidemic, right? It's not just some bad men who do bad things. This is an ongoing campaign that is hurting and killing women.
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my favorite subjects to even discuss, not because it's a good subject, but it's a subject that needs to be discussed. My entire public service career, as I said, I've been involved in public service for about almost 25 years at this point, has literally been shaped by women with violence perpetrated against them. I ended up being part of the domestic violence unit, which was a brand new unit when it was created when I started in the DA's office. And I ultimately was asked to go there for about a year. And because there's a huge burnout from that unit, it's very, very difficult cases. There's a huge dynamic that clouds the true matter and the true issue of violence. And I ended up staying for 15 years in that unit because of that. I ended up leading the unit, and I ended up becoming a national expert in the area of domestic violence. And I was named a National Judicial Fellow with my leadership on the bench by the National Council of Juvenile and Family Court Judges, because it's a huge issue. And when I was appointed to be deputy of that unit, which means lead that unit, the chief of that unit, I had said to the groups that typically deal with domestic violence issues, intimate partner violence issues, are you upset that it was me, a white man who is now going to be leading this unit? And the one person said to me, "Thank God it's you." And I said, "Well, thank you. I appreciate it." And they were like, "Not you personally, but thank God it's you, because we have been running up and down for 25, 30 years saying this got to stop. And it being a woman's issue, by you saying it with a white man with privilege and power, that this is not a woman's issue, this is a community or a societal issue. You're using your privilege and power in a way that will get things done." And I took that mantle and I ran with it, because I thought I had an obligation and a responsibility to use that white privilege and male power to do those type of things. And that's what I did. I ended up leading our Violence Against Women grant for our county, co-chairing our domestic violence task force in the county, as well as starting the first intimate partner violence homicide review team that we had in our county, because there were systematic breakdowns, and we are part of the system. The system always needs to be improved. Is how can we try to touch that system when people are impacted and make it better? Because truly, it is a societal issue. I'm right now as part of a national study with Futures Without Violence and a couple other organizations to deal with the impact of domestic violence on child welfare and how that impacts that, how the trauma deals with it. And I can give you a lot of great examples of how that actually is, identified. But we know that children receive trauma. They may not articulate it, but they receive trauma when they're in a domestic violence situation. And the impact upon that is just so, so great. And I tell people when I was in the DA's office, I tried dozens of homicides, and the domestic violence homicides, which is primarily the ones I was trying. In those domestic violence homicides, every single victim had left their abuser. And in society, that's what we tell people to do, to leave. But that is not always the safest thing for someone to do. So those cases are so, so difficult from a prosecution standpoint because people like to judge relationships. We're all asking, why did this happen? Why did this not happen? Those are reasons soap operas were so famous for like 40 years on TV, because we like to pick who the villain is. We like to pick who the bad guy is. We like to pick who the good person is. And that same dynamic rolls into the courtroom when you have domestic violence situations, because we all want answers why this happened. And did someone ask for it to happen? Did someone miss something that they should have seen? So we're judging relationships when we judge these type of cases. So I've actually not followed a lot about the case that you're talking about because I'm campaigning. But I will tell you that there was, in my own hometown, there was a woman that was murdered tragically, who was a woman of color, and there's no national media coverage about it.
I started kind of poking around a little bit about Gabrielle Petito because I was a little bit like, of course, the tragedy for her family is real, but also the larger context of why was this thing that people connected onto. And I actually noticed, like on Reddit forums, something that I actually thought was positive, which was lots of people relating their own story and also giving lots of advice that maybe isn't covered, right? It was like, make copies of your keys, get an app on your phone that makes copies of your calls. Because, and I think this is what you're saying, the reality is if you get away from being this soap opera observer and trying to figure it out, is that it's so hard to, I've never been in that situation myself directly, but it's so hard to understand why someone would stay, right? I don't even want to frame it that way, but I just thought that the advice was really valuable because before someone who's in that situation, male or female or whatever, before they're at the place of leaving, they're dealing with the reality of, is the person I'm with, can they change or not? And the mixed feelings of, I care for them or I love them. So it was just very practical advice. So regardless of media critique, I was actually, I see, this has become a flashpoint for people to connect. Sorry to go off on the tangent.
And, I like that you brought up systems too, because in so many of the cases, like in so many of these incidents, like the systems that we have to deal with these things are designed by men and people in power. And there don't have to be malicious actors for something to just fall through the wayside or fall through the cracks because, it's just not set up, it's not aligned to what the people that set up the systems thought about. Is that what you found?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, we have systems that are sometimes designed, the legal system is certainly not designed to be user friendly. That was not the intention of that. But I think that it's something that always needs to be addressed and looked at. I love systems change. And one of the great parts of being about a judge is when you see a problem in the system and you call a meeting, people show up. It's really great. As the deputy DA, I used to try to call meetings and people would say things like, oh, well, I'm busy that day. But when you're a judge and you say, we have a problem, we need to try to fix this. That's one of the benefits of being a judge is you have that power. So I've continued to try to use the power that I have and I've obtained for good, because I think that it's something that's always been changed. And we've seen it, that anything came out of COVID-19, the pandemic, was it caused the court system to make advancements. And those advancements helped people that typically would not have helped. And I will give you anecdotal evidence that I have more participation from parents in the cases that I oversee now, because they're able to make a telephone call and they're able to Zoom in, whatever it may be, and they don't have to take a day off work and miss a day of work. They don't have transportation issues to get to the courthouse. They're not spending 8 hours in the courthouse waiting for their case to be heard. And I don't know if that would have ever happened without the pandemic, where we can say, you know what, this is the time your case is going to be exactly. can schedule your lunch break at this time. We'll try to do the best we can to accommodate you. But I know I personally am having much more parent participation on cases because of Zoom. And I hope, I do more than hope, I actually pray that we take that advancement and we keep going with it. We don't stop and we don't go backwards. Because, it's great for us to be in a courtroom and have judges, walk and everybody stand and say, oyez, 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 we're now in session. But our true job is to be public servant leaders and try to make the system better for people that we're truly serving.
What do you think was the most consequential U.S. Supreme Court case decision?
Well, I think, as I feel like I'm pounding my head against the wall sometimes talking about the importance of judicial election. And, we are in a state where judges are elected, so we're not appointed. I was appointed for my job as well for Court of Common Pleas, and then I had to run and win a seat, which I did. But I think it's important that most people don't realize, unless it's a presidential year or something like that, we don't have as much participation. When these courts will actually make an impact. I mean, you look at the big decisions that have happened. They haven't been through legislation. They've been through court decisions, whether or not it deals with women's reproductive rights, whether or not it deals with segregation or desegregation, or whether or not it deals with whether or not anybody who loves each other can get married. These are all court decisions that never happened via the law and on an impactful level. I don't want to dissuade anybody from voting next year for the Senate or the governor or the state house or state Senate. But, there's 253 people that make up our state legislature. There are 9 judges on Commonwealth Court to decide whether or not they're doing what's right or what's wrong. And these seats aren't 2-year terms. They're not 4-year terms. They are 10-year terms that once you win, you never have to run again to seek retention. So, for somebody like me who's 50, I could serve on the bench for another 25 years. So that's generational impact that these elections make. And these judges make decisions that affect everybody. So, I could list 5,000 U.S. Supreme Court decisions because truly that's where most of the things that have shaped our society have come from.
Well, it's also something you mentioned earlier. Brian Sims, a representative from Philly, once said on a call, he's like, "Do you know what the qualification is to be in the Pennsylvania legislature?" He was like, "A pulse, and you live in Pennsylvania." And he did not mean that in a kind way. And I don't know if you know Brian, but he has a very sharp tongue. Actually, briefly, you mentioned earlier your recommendation, is it highly recommended from the Bar Association? I actually, it's one of those things that I see that and I never know what that means though. What goes into that? Because I don't know.
So, I think it's necessary because we can't, Brian can't, Brian will stand up and tell you and Brian was one of my first supporters, and Brian's doing a great job on social media trying to educate everyone in Pennsylvania how important this election is. He's always tweeting things and putting things out there, talking about these judicial seats. But I think that because we can't stand on the soapbox and tell you how we stand for something, that it's necessary to understand that the vetting is being done by other people that will ask questions that maybe we can or can't answer, but will then do a further investigation to find out about us. So for the Pennsylvania Bar Association that evaluates us, nonpartisan. So there are people from the entire Commonwealth, lawyers from the entire Commonwealth, but it's also important. There's also community members that are not lawyers on that committee as well.
Oh, really?
Yes. So when I did my interview, you do a huge interview, but you do a committee. They assign each person a group of 3. There are 2 lawyers and 1 community member on that. And they ask you questions not just about, your legal background, but they call people that appear in front of you to see what your temperament is. Anybody can have a good job interview, right? But they actually do the background to find out whether or not you have, do you have financial issues? Do you have taxation issues? Have you ever been, disciplined? Things like that the average person couldn't find out. They probably may be able to find out, but it would have been a lot of work for them to do. So when they rate you not just on your legal acumen, which, is a huge part of it, but also the way your temperament, the way you interact with people. What have you done for your community? For somebody that says, "Oh, I've decided at this point, I'm a certain age, I'm going to be a judge." Well, what have you done for the last X number of years prior to that to try to make your community better? So there's a lot of aspects about, your community involvement. And, you've heard me say, I believe that we're public servant leaders, meaning that people need to be able to see you out there and leading. So it's a very intense interview. And then after you do it with the committee, you do it with the entire judiciary group that interviews everybody. So it's intense. It was very intimidating. And, there's not a lot of things that intimidate me. but I was very intimidated by it. And, I think it's necessary, as I said, because we can't tell you necessarily how we would rule on something, but we can tell you what our background is.
Should we go to the game?
Do you want to do the opponents real quick?
Oh, yeah. I mean, okay, yeah.
So, I actually don't know if this falls outside of the canon, but do you want to say anything about how you see your opponents in this race positioning themselves, or what differentiates you from the other people who are running?
Yeah, so we actually sign an oath saying that we won't say anything negative about any of our candidates, our opponents that are running as well. But I mean,
refreshing.
We're not allowed to do it, but trust me, there are other organizations that will do it on behalf of some of the candidates. But I would just tell you that I am the only person in the race that is highly recommended. I am an adjunct law professor at Duquesne Law School. I am first generation, as I said. And I think, we all want diversity on our bench. Diversity comes in many, many forms. And we need to make sure that, the people that are on that bench are reflecting all of Pennsylvania and understand different backgrounds, different life skills. I will tell you that we were just on a forum and someone was asking about community service and things like that and what they do for their community. And somebody responded, they like to write checks to their food bank. So, I thought to myself, that's not community service, that's a check. That's making a donation to something. So I think that what sets me apart from my other candidates is my involvement in the community, my background, and a voice that's not on that bench. There's not a former prosecutor on that bench. There's one person that spent a very brief time, like a year as a DA, but not somebody who's actually been involved in the system. And I did work in the state Senate for 3 years as well in law school. That's one of my jobs to get through law school as a legislative aide. But if you're hearing whether or not the system is working for the people, you should actually have had some involvement of being part of the system and trying to make it better.
Yeah. I also, I think negative it's clear. It's like the famous thing about pornography. We all know what attack ads are. Differentiation is a little bit trickier. I will say, and I don't know if you can comment on this, but I was looking at Drew Crompton, and he has a quote that's on the Pennsylvania GOP site that says something to the effect of the job of judges is to interpret the law, not make the law. I don't know if you can comment on that statement, but I'll just say that, like, I personally find that a bit frustrating to hear from judges at whatever level, because it seems to me that it sort of assumes a certain level of like naivete for most people, right? We all know that if the law were perfectly written, you wouldn't need judges, right? Yeah. So, why? That's not a very impressive statement.
Right. And I mean, think about it. When people say those are magic buzzwords. I won't legislate from the bench. I'm a constitutionalist, all of those different type of things. Guess what? Our Constitution is an evolving and changing document. It is not a document that we do not want the same document we had from 1776.
In fact, it has built into it a thing called amendments. I don't know if you remember this. I love this. I think it was in 2010 when there was the swing that put a lot of Republicans in Congress. They decided to show how constitutional they were, to read the Constitution word for word, and none of them had done their homework, and they got to the 3/5. And like on C-SPAN, and they're like, oh, we don't want to say that.
We don't like that part. Pick and choose.
So, game.
Yeah, so it's called Judge This, or something like that. The inflection is important. So we're going to give you a this or that, basically, and you're going to have to show your judicial temperament. And,
if it wasn't obvious, this is meant to be lighthearted.
Yeah.
I'm hoping so.
Yeah. So the first one, Star Wars or Star Trek? On one corner we have sort of futuristic.
Okay.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm a kid that grew up playing Star Wars, so I'm a Star Wars guy.
Okay.
The
techno dystopian.
Yeah, I almost want you to put a hand on the Bible about 50. When you said that, I was like, I'm 49, and I was like, so we're perfectly of the age to have had Luke Skywalker deeply impressed on us.
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, I feel very much more affiliated with Star Wars than Star Trek. So you're certainly passing the we promise to not be as imposing as the Bar Association, but you're certainly pulling
You're
ahead in our book.
You're getting a 5-star rating from us.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, one of my favorite memories is, those movies coming out and you still went to the movie theater and, got all your snacks and everything and watching that, because that was just so over the top. I mean, there was no movies like that at that point. So
some movies you really have to see in a theater.
Yeah.
So Jordy, it's your turn.
I don't know
question.
them.
It's
my favorite question. Okay. So this is a barnstorming tradition. On the petitions that people pass around, do you support landscape orientation or portrait for
petitions to get on the ballot?
To get on the ballot.
I support whatever does the 8.5 by 11, because trying to walk around with those 8.5 by 14 used to kill you, because the clipboards were never that big and you could never sign the last part of it. You always had to fold it. So whatever makes 8.5 to 11 is my jam.
We will accept that. We are big orientation, but we would take an F11 because there's not enough room to put your name.
Yeah, and they have to be portraits by the state. It's so crazy.
Yeah, it is
clearly, the people that made this rule have never.
You can see we're dying on important hills here.
Yeah. Court deals with Department of State, so just so you know.
Yes.
Okay,
well, that's the next one.
Okay. He can't make a decision about that.
Oh, he can't make a decision.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, he's saving us, really. So now we're going to get into TV legal dramas. But which is better? Better Call Saul or Law and Order?
So I was a Law and Order person growing. I mean, it's been on for 400 years, I think, at this point. I mean, and I literally lived Law and Order SVU. That was my life for years and years and years. And I will be the first person to tell you I actually didn't watch a lot of legal dramas. When I was in law school, I watched LA Law, which in hindsight was more of a soap opera.
Yeah, it really jumped the shark around season 4. The first 2 seasons were good.
But I used to love The Practice. I thought that was a very smart show. So,
have you watched Better Call Saul, or is that just
no?
Okay. Well, all right. So
we had a big argument about this because I said it's too niche and no one knows it, but it is ranked as one of the best legal dramas. So, for what it's worth.
But I haven't seen any other ones, so I'm like I would have to have had recused myself from that question. Jordy, do you want to ask the question about
it's just the nomenclature
tragic heroes or non-heroes?
Yeah. So in judge this classic anti-hero shows, Breaking Bad or The Sopranos?
I'm so excited for October 1st because The Saints of Newark is coming out. So I will be Sopranos all day long. I'm looking forward to that. And I am going to go to the theater to see it as well, because that is something I think you need to see in the theater as well.
Hell yeah.
I will tell you, I can still hear the opening music from The Sopranos and get a little smile on my face just because it just is so catchy.
It's a great one. Food question. Altoona pizza or Philly cheesesteak?
So I would probably go for the pizza.
The Altoona pizza.
Yeah, I recognize cheesesteaks. I love my people in Philly, but the cheesesteaks, I never know what really is inside of them. So
that's fair. I know that people get really wound up about the cheesesteak, but I will say, I think I make my own, and using real cheese instead of Cheese Whiz makes it an inherently superior sandwich. I know that you love your traditions, and I'm not saying you shouldn't eat it, but don't tell me that Cheese Whiz is better than real cheese. And
there's a lot of pressure on ordering. Somebody from Pittsburgh, there's a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
I always remember that was it John Kerry that ordered Swiss cheese on his
Yeah, I thought you were going to ask whether or not it was cheesesteak or a panini sandwich. That's what I thought.
We don't know that one. What's that?
I don't know that at all.
We don't know the Pittsburgh cuisine.
Is that the cheeseburger sandwich?
No, it is also some sort of interesting meat, but it's served with French fries and coleslaw on top of it.
That sounds great. I wanted to ask you about the Pittsburgh salad. Taylor didn't believe me that it existed. I think it should be a statewide salad. I think it's in the.
I didn't know there was any other salad.
Yeah, right.
So I went somewhere and I said, "Well, where are my French fries?" And they said,
"Totally."
What are you talking about? Yeah.
It's basically steak and fries with a salad fig leaf
underneath. Yeah, right. You got a little bit of iceberg lettuce in there
with a vat of ranch dressing.
Yeah.
Yeah. The nomenclature question, and then we end it.
All right. So we're not sure you can judge this, but should it be the Pennsylvania Department of State or should it be the Pennsylvania Department of the Commonwealth?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the right answer for that is. We are a Commonwealth. We're one of the few places that are a Commonwealth. So it is a little bit misleading, I think, to the average bear.
I have pinned the governor and Cortez, the former Secretary of State, on this in a public forum, and they both looked a little sheepish, saying, "Yeah, it's probably thing."
Well, I think that's good.
That's excellent. Yeah.
No dodges.
Yeah.
No dodges. You came very strong on all of you had a very clear answer on all of those. So
Well,
I don't know.
Hopefully all the candidates at this point in their life should be very strong and there should be no dodges. But
Yeah.
that's what separates us, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Where can people find more information from your campaign or read more about you if they're interested?
So we're active on social media. So you can find us on Facebook, Judge Spurgeon for Commonwealth, as well as we have a website, judgespurgeonforcommonwealthcourt.com. They can find information there. They can find other links to do other things for us on there, as well as read a little bit more about our, the bio and the background. I know it's hard for judge who to vote for judge, but I really, really encourage people to really follow the PBA. It's an intensive application. It's an intensive interview process with small groups, big groups. And I think that they did a really good job. And I'm not just saying that because I'm highly recommended, but I think that they did a good job.
I love that. And, I'm going to do what I can just look that up because I honestly didn't know that. And I do sometimes feel that the world of law can be a bit too insular, especially at the Supreme Court level. I had an epic argument with my mother-in-law about whether U.S. Supreme Court justices should definitely have been lawyers, because I was pointing out that Sandra Day O'Connor was not, and many haven't been historically. And the more that they, go to college, go to law school, immediately start clerking, and have never even been a trial attorney, I think it creates this sort of rarefied ivory tower.
Last question. Will you take the powdered wig or will you leave that?
So I am not a powdered wig guy because I have pretty good hair. I'm going to be honest with you, for 50.
Yeah.
I'm doing okay at 50 on that. But I really think that that's just a way to separate us from the average person. And people need to realize that we are tangible people that are involved in our community. We are people that want to do good, and we should be electing people that's their fun.
All right. Judge David Spurgeon for Commonwealth Court. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Trouble, I've had my share now.